Good day and welcome to another MMA bootcamp video. For today's video, I'm going to help you out on using CSS Grid in achieving layouts that you are tasked to do with. Or, for example, if you're working on your personal projects, you're aiming to have such layout using CSS Grid. So, ano yung gagawin natin to achieve such thing? So, in our case, we're going to have here an example. So this is an example. For example, you are tasked to create this layout, which you will be having 5 sections that will have this kind of layout. So using grid, we'll have this output later on. So let's get started with working with our CSS grid. So first things first, of course, is we need to have a container to cater such sections or layout that we want to have. And in our case, we want this one to be visible. So let's specify here specific width. Let's just say it will be 600 pixels and a height of 500 pixels. Also, let's add here a border, which will be 1 or 2 pixels, solid black. Yep, I think that will do. Yeah, we have here our container. And this will be the container where we're going to create those 5 sections that we have here as an example. So let's create those containers naman. Or sorry, items naman. Let's specify here item. And we'll be having 5. Sorry. Let's specify here item. I think there's something wrong with that one. Yeah. I think I'm using ins. Yeah, there. So we have here 5 items. As of now, it's not visible. So same with with our container, we want this 5 items to be visible on our end. But for now, let's add things in here or labels. Say 1, this will be 2, this will be 3, this will be 4, and this will be 5. Currently, the default behavior of this items that we have here is to take up one block. Since we're using here a div provides or is a block or takes up a whole block or a section in our container. So right now, let's just make things visible as well on our end. Let's put in a border dun sa ating mga items. And let's specify here to have a 1 pixel of solid red. And as you can see, it all have their own border. Now, I mentioned that we're going to work on using CSS grid. And right now, saan ba dapat dinedefine yung display grid? If you're going to work on this grid, you need to remember that you declare grid inside the parent element. In our case, it's the container class. So let's put in here display grid. And what will happen here is it will take up the whole uh, height of the container that we have because we define here the display grid. Right now, we're not achieving what we wanted to have, but we're going there slowly, one by one. So first things first is we need to have or we need to know how many columns are we going to work on with this one. In our case, para malaman natin kung ilan yun is we need to specify or check alin ba dito yung pinakamaliit na unit or section that we have. And in our case, it will be the 4 and the 5. These two are equal. So let's start counting how many columns it will take up for this whole thing to be covered. And let's assume that this will be 1, this will be 2. And since these two are somewhat equal, or I think it's equal, this will take up 2 as well, same with what we have here. Then this, overall, we'll have here 4 columns, like 1, 2, 3, and 4. So, right now, we have specific thing in mind na magwo-work tayo for 4 columns. Of course, we need to think of as well how many rows naman yung kailangan nating gawan or work on. So, same thing with what we have on columns. We need to check which is the smallest section that we have. In our case, itong dalawa. And this takes up rows like 1, 2, and 3. So in our case, let's just put a comment here. We're going to work on 4 columns and 3 rows. So ito yung magiging basis natin for our example layout. So right now, we need to define here inside the container, ilan ba yung columns na gusto natin na i-take up ng ating mga items. So for us to do that is we need to specify grid template dash columns. And in my case, I'm going to make use of the repeat function, which the first parameter is accepting ilang beses siya uulitin. In our case, 4. Kasi 4 yung column na need natin na magkaroon. And the next parameter will be ano yung unit na gagamitin natin or how big will each columns be. In our case, I'm going to use a unit on what we call 1FR or 1 fraction, meaning it will have equal width for each items on our grid. Now, since we're done having the columns, we need now to define the grid rows or template rows. So in our case, like what we have here, we're going to work on 3. So let's just specify here 3, and that will do. So the first thing that we need to do is to achieve this section. Yung 1 is kailangan ni 1 na ma-take up yung whole width of the container on the top or the first row of our grid. And for us to do that, we need to first target this one. Since they have the same class names, we're going to use an advanced selector, which will be item, and that will be nth child, meaning we're targeting the nth child of item or our container. In our case, the nth child item 1 is this one kasi siya yung first. Then here is we're going to specify grid dash column, meaning ganong karaming column yung iti-take up niya. In our case, I'm going to specify here 1 over 5. So, ano yung ibig sabihin ng 1 over 5? So, let's just go back in this one real quick. We're going to check here the grid lines or the grid line. Grid line is the thing that uh, can be either horizontal or vertical, and also it's the thing that resides in between a specific grid item. In this example, ito yung grid line in color yellow. This one is also a grid line. This one is a grid line, and those edges that we have are also grid lines. So let's just think of as like yung border ng each container at saka yung mga item na meron tayo dun sa ating grid. So, in our case, I specified here that we're going to take in 1 up until the 5th. This over means up until. So, meaning, we're going to take the first grid line up until the 5th grid line. Since this kind of setup works on grid lines. So, let's go back in our example. So, it just says here that since we have here 4 columns, and we also counting the edges. Let's just start counting with edges. Starts with this right part. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So meaning, starting from left to right, we're going to take up first grid line up until the 5th grid line. And as you can see, this is the output for that one. So now, we need to make sure that we're going to have the 2 or 3, 4, 5 sections to take up just the half of what we have on the container. So for us to do that, let's just specify here the second child. I'll just copy this one. I'll just specify here for the second child, the 2, to take up the first up until the third. As you can see, it already took half of the specified container width. But as you can see, bumaba si number 5. Why? Because we have here defined 3 rows, meaning there's still another space for 5 to work on or to push on. Kaya na-take up din niya yung lower part ni section 2. But for us to fix that one, we just need to define grid dash row. Then we'll start with counting with grid lines as well. In our case, that will be 1, 2, 3, and 4. But in our case, we just wanted this two section to cover up the second grid line up until the fourth grid line. So let's just do it that way. And as you can see, it already covered up the half and also the remaining rows that we have on our example. Now, the only thing that we need to do now is this 3 to take up this remaining spaces that we have on top. Para si 4 and 5 will just divide the remaining or take up the remaining spaces. So same on what we have on the first 3 or first 2 items that we have. The third child or the nth child, the third child that we have here, the 3, will take up now the grid column of uh we have here the 1, we have here the 2, we have here the 3, 3 up until the 5th grid column. And as you can see, ito na yung output that we want to achieve. For us to have these spacings, we can make use of here inside the container a gap and specify how big you want it to be. In my case, I would just want it to be like 10 pixels. And there you have it. This is exactly how you can create such layout, creating a CSS grid. We also have other options on making such layout using CSS grid, but for now, we're going to stick with specifying grid columns using grid lines and also selecting specific items that takes up specific number of columns and rows in our layout. But for now, this will all do. You can work on now with your layout and improve the contents of it. This can actually be a specific website already or just another section in your website. So for now, we'll just leave it as is. I already showed you how can we make use of CSS Grid. For the next few videos that we're going to have, we're going to tackle another way on how to create such layout using a different approach using CSS Grid. So see you on the next video.